Wade back here with you, High Noon Leatherworks, for another leather adventure. And today we're going to continue part 2 of the double magazine pouch holster and the wet forming of that holster. We put it all in the last episode, put it all in a little jig we made up with some 1x4s and some clamps. If you haven't seen that, go back, take a look at part 1, and then come back to this one where we're going to finish that, and we're going to actually stitch that on the Chinese shoe repair machine. So come on in and let's get started. I've got my wet molded double magazine pouch piece here that if you go back and check out the last episode, part 1 of this, you could see how I did that. And then today we're going to go through how I'm going to finish this. I am going to stitch this on my Chinese hand crank shoe repair machine, and I do have some videos on that. If you haven't seen those, go back and check those out. Talks about the machine itself and how much it cost and where to get it and so on. So go check those out. And what I'm going to do is I want to pull this down to where I just have enough on this back part or on the bottom part so that I can actually get my foot, my stitching foot, across there and stitch that. I don't want to go any further than I have to because of I want to have plenty up here for my closing flap. So I don't want to cheat myself out of any of that leather up there. So I'm going to put my leather in here, my 2 pieces, and I'm going to hold those together, and I'm going to run my stitcher foot right across the bottom here where I wet formed that. So I'm going to start by making a couple of forward passes here. Then I'm going to come up. I'm going to lift my presser foot, if I can find it here. I'm going to lift that up. I'm going to spin the stitching head around 180 degrees, lower that presser foot, and then I'm going to back stitch that. That'll make the machine go backwards. And I'm just going to back stitch it a couple of stitches, 3 stitches, and then do the same thing. Turn it back another 180 degrees to where I'm coming right back toward me again. So that'll lock that in. Again, I'm going right along the bottom. I want to make sure I don't have anything in the way back here when I get moving my piece. So that piece is running, my stitcher foot is running right across the bottom edge of where the wet forming stopped. Now I'm going to go past the edge where I'm going to stitch up the side and do the same thing as I did at the beginning. I'm going to pull that up, move my presser foot, lift it up, spin it 180, lower it down, and go back and lock that stitch in. Lift my presser foot, turn it 180, back facing me. Now I can go ahead and I think I'll pull that stitch out so I can check out what's going on here. And it looks like my bobbin may be out of thread, so I'm going to have to rethread my bobbin here. So let me cut this off. And I'll check my bobbin. So I'll cut my threads here, leave just a little tiny bit on each end, maybe 1/8 of an inch sticking out. And there's my stitch that goes all the way across the bottom section here. I'll get a lighter and that little 1/8 inch thread that I have hanging out. I'll just melt that wherever I have thread hanging out, and that'll also lock my stitch in. So I've got it double stitch forward, backwards, locked in, and then go ahead and heat up those ends. So I've got plenty of thread here on the top piece. Let me double check, see what I got going on. I'll check my bobbin and then I'll be back. Alright, I got my bobbin rethreaded and ready to go. So I've got this stitched again down at the bottom. Now I'm going to go ahead and go from the bottom up to the top in the middle. I want to stitch that first. So I want to put this in and put my presser foot down to where my needle is going to go into that same line of stitches. In fact, it just went in the exact hole. So as long as I don't split a stitch, I'm in pretty good shape. I'm just going to run that presser foot right down the center of where I wet formed that and flatten that out. I'm going to go all the way to the top. And then I'm going to lift my presser foot, just like I did on the other side. I'm going to spin around my presser foot head, lower my presser foot back down, and back stitch. Go about 4 or 5 stitches. Then I can lift my presser foot up, spin it back around, and pull my thread out. And I can go ahead and clip that on the top, clip it on the back. Now I have the center sewn. So the only thing I need to do is clip this beginning thread. I leave about 1/4 inch. Clip the ending thread, about 1/8 to 1/4. Then I can go ahead and melt that. Flatten that down. So now those are locked in. So I've got my center stitched and I've got my bottom stitched. Now I want to make sure that I have plenty of thread to start with here. Now I'm going to go up the right hand side and the left hand side here. So those are the only two I have left. Again, I'm going to start just like I did on the other side and put that right on that stitch line that goes across the bottom. I forgot to tie this one in by back stitching, so I want to make sure I do that this time. So I'll go 4 or 5 stitches, lift up the presser foot, spin it around 180 degrees, lower the presser foot. Again, I line it up with my needle. Then I can go back and lock that stitch in. Come back, raise the presser foot, go back 180 degrees, lower it. Now I'm ready to go again. Forward. And again, I'm using that presser foot as my guide, so I can get a good straight stitch. Get to the end, do the same thing. Lift it up. Lower it back down. And then lock that stitch in. Pull my thread out. Trim it off. Make sure I leave about 1/4 inch. Then I can go ahead and burn those. And then I can move on to my last stitch, which I'll start the same way except on the other side. So pull that out. I can double check, make sure my magazines are going in there good, with no problem. They look nice and snug. So I can go ahead and put my piece in the machine, lower it down, I'll go 4, spin it around, lock it in, raise it up, spin it back around, lower it. There's my lock stitch at the beginning. So use your hand as a guide. Keep your line straight, your stitching line straight. Let the machine do all the work. It's got a good walking presser foot on it. So if you do have a machine like this or thinking about getting one, it does have a good presser foot. I like it. Spin it around, lock in the stitch. Make sure I have plenty of thread there. trim it off. Go ahead and light it. Seal that stitch. And all the stitching is done. So I've got it stitched down both sides, in the middle, and at the bottom. So now we'll go back over to the bench and go from there. Alright, so now I've got my stitching done down the sides, at the bottom, in the middle. I can take my piece of tape off where I had the top marked now. And then what I'm going to do, the next thing, is I want to trim this up. And I want to leave, approximately a 1/4 inch on the outside of the stitch when I trim this down. So I want to be very careful not to make a crooked cut here. I want to make sure I get a nice straight cut. So on my first cut, I'll be pretty gentle as I drag my blade through there, because I'm going through 2 thicknesses now. So I want to double check as I cut through. There's the first thickness. Now I can use that as a guide for my back, as long as I'm careful and don't cut into that top layer. And I can cut that back part off. And then I'll do the same on the other side. And I want to make sure that I am getting this, looks like about 5 3/4 is where I'm going to be, total width. I'm going to flip this over and give me a better cut. Again, I can cut through that top piece, and then that'll give me a guide to cut through the bottom. Just have to be careful. Don't want to make a mistake at this point, because you've already put all this time into it, wet molding it. And then I can go ahead and follow that line and cut that top section off. So there's my scrap. Now I can turn around and go to the bottom, and basically I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to leave approximately a 1/4 inch outside of the stitches. And go ahead and cut that across. Again, being very, very careful. So there's that scrap piece. Now you can see that my border around my stitches, everything's starting to be symmetrical. I am going to round these corners off. I don't like them square like that. So I can the only problem with using a quarter or something like that, I'd need to flip it over and do it on the back, which is not a problem, but cutting it out that way might be. So you could use your knife, you could use your punch. All I'm going to do is freehand this and come around and just cut the corner off of it, just to give it a slight radius and get that point off of there, which if you need to use something as a guide and not freehand it, that's not a problem either. And then I just work my way, taking a little bit off at a time. Around that corner there until I make sure that my corners match. So that gives you an idea. Now it's just a small radius around there. Let me get my pieces I just cut off out of the way. Now I've got my pouch, bottom part of my pouch finished so that my magazines fit in there. Turn that one around. I believe it goes that way. Let me double check. No. So my magazines fit in there. They're nice and snug. They're not going to fall out if I have a flap open and bend over, but yet they're easy enough to pop out of there. Now I'm going to double check, push these in real good toward the bottom, and then pull over my flap and see how much room I have to get my snaps in there. And it looks like I've got about an inch, so I've got plenty of room to put my snaps in. Now the thing is, I've got to square this up because of my stitching. When I cut along my stitching lines after and trimmed it up, I need to make sure now that my top is square to that. So I am going to take just a small, just a pin mark here. Transfer that to the back. Just so I can see it enough to cut that. So I'll start right at the edge of the front piece and then come down to that mark. And what that'll do is that'll square that side up to the exact straightness of where I did the trimming on the side. Then I want to make sure that it's square across the top. That's easy to do. I can just put it on my grid and put the bottom straight across, and then just barely trim that off where it straightens it up. And I squared this up when I cut the pieces at the beginning, but the problem is when you wet form this, it distorts that piece of leather a little bit, and then when you put your stitches in there, depending on how straight you can get your stitches, that's going to lead to that having to clean that up or straighten the edges. Now, I mentioned this earlier at the beginning of the first video, that I want these flaps to be separate. I don't want it to just be one flap that where I open it, now both magazines are exposed. I want to be able to open each one separately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my quarter, I'm going to round these edges, these two corners on the flap. I'm going to do that first, then I'm going to come back. I'll show you what I'm going to do next. I'm sorry, I'm getting right in your way. Didn't mean to block the camera. And then do the same thing on this edge. So I'm following that line I just put on there from that quarter. And that seems to give a pretty good radius. So there's my radius on the corners there. Now what I want to do is I want to pull this over, find the center, and the reason this one fits in there a little deeper is this one has an extension on it, a finger extension. That's the only reason why. So I'm going to pull that over. I'm going to find the center of that according to, I'm not going to measure it, I'm going to find it according to my stitch, where I put my stitch down the middle. So I'm going to probably take about 1/4 to 3/8 out of the center of that. And I'm going, remember, I'm going by my stitch. So I'll take my smallest round punch that I have, like for a belt, something like that. I'm going to put the center of it right on that center stitch. I better get my poly backer here. And I'll bring that right down almost to where the top part touches. Not quite, because I got some space up here above. So I'll go ahead and I'll punch through that. Then I can go ahead and I can take my straight edge and I'm right on the edge of that punch, the corner of that punch. And then I can go ahead and cut that. Move over to the other side of the punch. And you could measure this and mark it if you'd like. Just doing it by eye. And then I'll cut that. Make sure I'm all the way through. And then you can see what that does. It cuts a nice divot, round edge here, then I cut the center of it out. What that's going to do is allow me to open and close these separately. So all I need to do now is round those edges the same as I did these, and remember I used a quarter on those, so I'll do the same here so that they match. And then I'll go ahead and round those off. And again, what makes these cuts so have to be so particular at this point is you've already done all the work, the hard work, doing the wet molding and the stitching, and you definitely don't want to make a mistake now, so you want to be very careful. So there's my two flaps, one for each side. Now all I have to do is mark where I want my snap, so I can snap these closed. And I'm gonna, in case I put an extension, a finger extension on this one, I'm gonna make it the same. I don't want to pull it down any further and then later get a finger extension for that magazine and then not be able to use it. So I want to go ahead and do this side first, and then probably I'll take this finger extension magazine, put it over here, and do the same thing so that I can match it. So I'm going to pull that down, take my stylus, put me a mark right about the center of the actual lid, the flip over, and I'm going to punch that first because I want to make sure that I have this matched up perfect. So I'll punch that out first, then I'll pull that over fairly tight, make sure that I'm nice and straight, don't get my flap crooked, and then I can make my mark on the other side for the other piece. I can take that out. I can put the corner of this poly board in there and punch that hole. So there's my holes for my snap on that side, and I'm going to do the same for this side because I want to make sure I use the same magazine so that they match, just again in case I get another one of these extended mags, the finger extension for it. I'm going to do the same thing here. Make my mark, punch my hole, pull that over. And I'll double check it with my other side here. Make sure they match. And make my mark there. Pull the magazine out. Put my poly board corner in there so that I can make my hole. So there's my holes for my snaps and my double 45 ACP pouch that's wet formed. So the next thing is to go ahead and put the snaps in. Alright, I'm back. I'm going to go ahead and use some silver hardware here for the snaps. I'm going to use silver because the next project I'm going to do is going to need to match this leather. So the hardware I'm going to use on the next project is going to be silver. I know that, so I want it to match this one. So I'll put the flat side of my anvil in there. I can put, well, probably shouldn't have put my anvil in. Let me put my hardware in first. Put it up through the hole. I'm going to put the male side of the snap over here. Now I can put the anvil in with the flat side up. Put my snap in. Get my setting tool. Go ahead and set that snap. Put the second one in on the other side. Put the anvil in, the flat part. Put the snap on. And you can see I'm rotating that setting tool as I'm hitting that. It just seems to put a nicer edge on the set of the snap when I do that. Now I can go ahead and put the other side on and flip my anvil over and use my cupped end for that. I always check them to make sure they're good and tight. I don't like them to spin around. Same thing on this side. Double check it. Put my magazines in. And then there's my finished pouch. The only thing I have to do to it to totally finish it is put me a belt loop in here. And probably what I'll do is I'll just cut some slits in here. But I'm not sure how I'm going to do that yet till I get to my next project and match this up with it. But I may just put some slits in here so I can put that on my belt. Alright, so there's a completed project, except the belt loops, and like I said, I'm not sure how I'm going to do those yet, so I'll do those later when I get my other project done and see how I want that to fit or where I want to put it. I may put a clip on here just so it clips on my belt instead of putting belt loops. That may be a lot easier. I might put double clips on it, so I'm not sure yet how I'm going to do that. But it turned out really nice. Snaps work great. You can pull out your magazines. They're snug. They're not going to fall out. I do have room on this side to put a finger extension like this one has on it. So the wet forming turned out great, made it real nice and easy to stitch. And obviously you could stitch this by hand, you don't have to have a machine. I just thought this would be a good project because of the thickness of the leather to use that Chinese shoe repair machine, and it worked great. The stitches turned out great, so it's going to last a long time. So thanks for coming along, checking it out. I hope it helped you out in some way, and please, like I always say, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.